My name is Jolyn Miller, and I work for Willoway Nurseries. I'm a sales rep here in the Chicagoland area. But prior to that, I ran my own little business where I did small garden design and maintenance in the western suburbs. And I've been gardening for about 25 years in the same garden spot. So I've had a lot of challenges, and even despite all of that, I'm still learning new things every day about plants and the way they grow and the crazy things that they do. So while I feel I have quite a bit of knowledge, I certainly don't know everything. So if I can't answer your question, I've got my tablet here and I will try to find an answer for you. So we're going to talk today a little bit about successful perennial and shrub combinations for long-lasting color. And that's always a little tricky, right? Because not all perennials bloom at the same time, not all shrubs bloom at the same time. And how do you extend that color from spring pretty much through frost or even year-round? So the number one consideration for any kind of design or combining plants are your cultural requirements. And what I mean by that is, does your site get full sun, part sun to shade, part shade to sun? Is your soil moist? Is it well drained? Is it dry? Those are all things that you should really ask yourself first before you start your plant selection, because plants are really grown best when they're sited properly. So always consider that first. After that, honestly, you're really only limited by your imagination. There are no hard and fast rules, and there's no shame in copying. If you see inspiration in a botanical garden or a garden center or your neighbor's yard, you can always try to mimic what you see and copy that into your own garden. Certainly, the online Pinterest and Instagram always has great pictures of gardens that you can try and copy. And then another key thing is make sure that you choose plants that you love or that you like or that you find that are really pretty, because then you're going to really enjoy your garden, right? And then lastly, you need to do a little bit of homework, right? Because it is difficult to kind of remember what every plant is going to do or how long a plant is going to bloom. So I always have my cell phone with me when I'm choosing plants, and if I forget a little detail, you can Google that plant and find out pretty much anything you need to know about it. So that's not really considered cheating, just so you know. So there's some other considerations that you can take into account when you're planting your garden beds. And one of them, of course, is your bloom time and length of bloom. Again, that can be a little bit tricky because there are no shrubs or perennials that are going to bloom from early spring all the way to frost. So you kind of have to stagger your blooms if you want that color to last from early spring through frost. And then another thing I hear a lot from people is, well, when it stops blooming, it doesn't do anything. It's just kind of there. That I see only as sort of true, because green's a color too, right? And that has an integral part of your landscape. And then there's also like the shape of a plant, the texture of a plant. And there's a lot of shrubs out there now as well that have colored foliage, which is really going to help extend color in your garden if that's what you're looking for. So really the key, and then of course, other than bloom time and the length of bloom, your plant size and shape. The texture of the plant. Does it look dainty? Does it look robust? Does it have thick leaves, thin leaves, frilly leaves, big, complete leaves, I guess is what you could say. That all has to do with like the texture, and texture plays a really important part in the garden as well. And then finally, you're gonna look at your flower height, color, and your foliage color, as I kind of mentioned earlier. But for the longest lasting color in your garden, you want to be sure to choose plants from these groups. You want to throw some bulbs in there. You want to use some perennials. Try to incorporate some ornamental grasses, deciduous shrub, and by deciduous, you know that means the leaves fall off in the winter. Some evergreen shrubs, and maybe a small ornamental tree. So if you're not super confident on what to include, a plant or plants, I always encourage plants, from all of those groups will really give you color almost all year round in any garden bed that you're designing or planting in. Here's a little design tip that's often overlooked. If you're kind of what I consider a plant nerd like myself that likes all plants and you want one of everything, it's a great thing. But I really encourage people to plant in groups. There's a little, I don't want to call it a rule because rules are kind of meant to be broken, I guess, a little bit in the planting world. You want to use groups of odd plants in general, in 3s, 5s, 7s, depending on what size garden bed that you have. And then like a tree or just a single evergreen shrub, those are meant to be specimen plants. That's what we kind of refer to as a specimen plant. It's a standalone plant that's meant to maybe shine at a certain time of year and or use as a background for some of your other blooming perennials and shrubs. So that's a good tip, right? So we're going to choose a few shrub and perennial combinations here that you're going to find here at Sunrays Greenhouse throughout the year that will bring you long-lasting color. I wanted to point out that my selections for you here, my combos, are really highlighting grasses, shrubs, and perennials. I didn't include bulbs or generally small trees so that we could really focus on the perennial and shrub combinations. So let's say, going back to again, your number one consideration is going to be your cultural requirements. So let's say you've got full sun, average to well-drained soil, somewhat dry, okay? In my first combo up here, I've got a blushing knockout rose, a weeping spruce, some lavender. The picture is actually lavender phenomenal. Some creeping thyme, and a white coneflower. What this is going to do, it works because your weeping spruce is going to give you texture, color, form, pretty much all year round. And then your creeping thyme will give you kind of a nice ground cover in front at the beginning of your beds with some spring blooms, right? And then the long blooming lavender and coneflower will kind of give you color all throughout the summer. And of course, the knockout roses, which come in a variety of colors. I just happened to pick the blushing knockout, have a pretty long bloom time. And as an added bonus, they're somewhat drought tolerant. So if you have an area that at least it has full sun, but maybe sometimes gets a little dry, as long as your rose bushes are established, it can handle a little bit of drought. So the next one we're going to look at is up here in the corner is another combo with a knockout rose. This time we're just going to use the regular double red knockout with those cherry red flowers. I find a very interesting combo is to pair that with some yellow daylilies, some white garden phlox. I used a big blue stem. It's called Black Hawks, and as you can see, it has this nice dark foliage and a Chamaecyparis golden mop. Once again, that's going to give you color pretty much all year round because your Chamaecyparis is going to stay green and or mostly green during the winter months. The daylilies and the phlox combine really nice with that cherry red of the knockout roses. And then the nice spiky grass is going to give you some interest in like texture and additional color in the landscape, especially in the late fall when the grasses really kind of highlight themselves. So another group of roses that is really, really popular, and your knockouts generally, 3.5 to 4 feet, right? So you can mix the daylilies and the phlox kind of in front of your roses. The grasses maybe next to them, right? You don't want to hide the rose with the grasses. And then the Chamaecyparis mops kind of off to the side as well. So kind of sticking with our theme of full sun, somewhat dry soil, we're going to look at the drift roses next. The drift roses are more of a lower growing, they are considered a ground cover rose. And again, the nice thing about the drift roses, the drift roses grow maybe 2 feet high, right? And they're going to spread to about 3 to 4 feet wide. So they are meant to go kind of at the front of the border. So that's going to give you a lot long blooming color at the front of your border. And then this combo is just a riot of color in like orange and purple, right? Which is a really striking color combination in and of itself. So I've mixed these with this one right over here is a barberry. It's called a Sunjoy Orange Pillar Barberry. And that's going to have this wonderful orangey red foliage on it, very upright. That's going to give you color from early spring pretty much till the leaves fall off. And sometimes it kind of retains its leaves in the winter as well. And you can mix that in with some salvia, yarrow, right? Some yarrow of a color of your choice, coreopsis, and I threw an aster in there for some fall color. So once again, that's going to give you color, interest, and different textures to really make that shine in kind of like a hot color combo, right? So now let's move on to full sun with well-drained soil. You don't want this next couple of combos to be too dry. And we're going to talk a little bit about hydrangeas because everybody loves hydrangeas, but who here thinks that a hydrangea is for part shade? I don't see a lot of hands. Well, that's great because I think that is one of the misconceptions of hydrangeas, that they like part shade. That may be true in the South, but up here in the northern climate, if you want to grow hydrangeas, I really recommend putting them in full sun. You're going to have the best blooms if you keep your hydrangeas in full sun. The other thing I want to mention about hydrangeas are there are so many varieties out there now. You're kind of only limited by your imagination and really what size you want. The one I have featured here is a hydrangea called Bobo. It's one of the smallest ones, growing maybe 3 feet high to 3 feet wide. And I featured Bobo in this presentation because a lot of us don't have a whole lot of space. And so if you have a smaller garden area that you want to make a big impact, you really like hydrangeas, but you're not sure which one to choose, this is a really good selection. It flowers prolifically and starts out white and it matures to pink blooms. And they have those nice, big, fluffy panicle blooms that make hydrangeas so popular. So what would you, and you can put it in containers too. It's small enough to where if you have a large container, you want to put that up on a sunny porch, you can throw it in a container and it'll do just fine for you. So I think it looks great with other kind of pink and white blooming things. Maybe throw a little bit of purple in there. So in this instance, and you know, your hydrangeas really aren't going to come into their own until about midsummer. So you maybe want to mix that with some earlier blooming shrubs like a lilac or a wigelia, or some of the early blooming viburnums, right? So I chose a lilac here. And then to bring color more throughout the year and in early spring, I put in a 9-bark. The botanical name for 9-bark is Physocarpus, and this one is called Tiny Wine. It stays a little on the shorter side too, and it has this magnificent black-purple foliage from early spring through the fall. And a couple of perennials that look really good with that is Veronica. One I chose here was Magic Snow White Wands. And then I threw a grass in there, a dwarf fountain grass, also known as Pennisetum. This one is called Etouffee, which you'll find here at the greenhouse. And that's going to give you some late summer color with these beautiful little flower heads on them that kind of darken as the season goes along. So what else to plant with hydrangeas though, right? So as long as you choose plants that like full sun and it's not going to get too dry, you can plant, if you want to go with evergreens, you can use boxwoods. Boxwood, a simple combination of boxwood and hydrangea is absolutely stunning. Of course, I like to throw some other things in there because again, the hydrangea really doesn't come into its own till the summer. But to keep it simple, you can put boxwood with that. Again, some early blooming shrubs like wigelia, which I have pictured here. Butterfly bush. Butterfly bushes go wonderfully in the same bed with the hydrangeas because they both like the same type of cultural requirements. And then you can use a variety of perennials such as iris, daylilies, oriental lilies look really nice with that. And certainly other evergreens like your arborvitaes and your spruce. A lot of different varieties of those type of plants where you're really only limited by the kind of the shape that you're looking for. Let's move into part sun, right? Because not all gardens are full sun, and a lot of garden beds too. You're gonna find that maybe one area of your garden bed is full sun, and then as you move along into another part of your garden bed, you're gonna get into maybe more part shade. So in those instances, you do want to kind of choose plants that are gonna fit for each of those locations, right? So for part shade to sun with well-drained soil. And by the way, full sun means 6+ hours of sunlight a day, okay? Sun to part shade, I kind of consider that maybe four hours of sun moving into shade. And then when I kind of refer to part shade to sun, I'm going with the premise that you're getting more than 4 hours of shade moving into a little bit of sun. So for a part sun to sun, so maybe, 4 hours to less of sun a day with well-drained soil. This combo here is going to give you a ride of color from the beginning of spring, pretty much through frost. And kind of a not so well-known shrub is called Spirea Glowgirl. It's a birch leaf spirea made by Proven Winners Plants. And it is, it's got this kind of lemony lime foliage. So you're gonna get a lot of bright color there. Prolific white flowers in the spring, with an added bonus is that when fall comes, the foliage turns to a lovely like orange burgundy color. So it's really a shrub that's interesting from early spring right through to frost. And it mixes well. It likes friends, so it mixes well with a lot of part sun perennials, such as delphiniums, bee balm. You're all familiar with bee balm, monardas, and daisies, right? And another plant that I find super flexible is, and I use this a lot myself, is ice dance sedges, right? They're primarily sort of shade plants, but they're so adaptable that many varieties do super well in part sun to part shade conditions as well. This particular one, ice dance, has variegated foliage. It pretty much stays in nice little clumps, doesn't get too aggressive, and offers color once again from early spring all the way through. I've had my foliage stay looking pretty good in the winter as well. So that's another combination that's a riot of color, just from early spring all the way to frost. So we'll move into, we're going to start talking about part shade a little bit more here. So maybe you like hydrangeas, but feel you have a little too much shade. You want to choose an oak leaf hydrangea, right? Oak leaf hydrangeas still have these beautiful changing color panicles on them. They're called oak leaf hydrangeas because the leaves are shaped like oak leaves. And another added bonus, which makes them delightful in the winter, is it has an exfoliating bark on it. So even in the winter, you're going to have some interest there in your garden. And it's another plant that really likes friends. It grows really well with, for instance, this plant up here, this white blooming one, is called Aronia lowscape mound. It is a low growing shrub that is similar to Rus grollo, if you're familiar with that plant, except it has a lot more interest. The white blooms in the spring, it's kind of long lasting, and then it also turns a brilliant red color in the fall. So again, you're going to have interest from fall to spring to fall. Down here, I have another shrub that's going to go really well with the oak leaf hydrangea, and that's called Clethra. The one I chose here, this picture, is called a Sugartina crystallina, and it gets these midsummer blooms, a lot of them. They're fragrant, so they're really going to also attract pollinators to your garden, which is always an added benefit today. I threw an arborvitae in there, and then for some early spring interest, you can mix that with some aquilegia, and then for year-round color, really from spring through frost, is a heuchera or a coral bell. If you're not familiar with coral bell, I think most people at this point have grown coral bells. They're super easy to grow. They retain their color most of the year round, and they come in such a variety of colors that I find them to be extremely adaptable. They do well in part shade to almost full sun, especially like the purple leaf varieties. There's varieties out there now that have almost black foliage. Those are going to really kind of do better in more sun. Your green-leaved varieties are maybe a little bit more part shade, but either way, they're super adaptable. They're really long-lived plants, and they get along well with other plants. So coral bells are definitely, I think, a garden mainstream, especially up here in the Chicagoland area, because they are so easy to grow. And as far as like colors, right? I have been sort of specific on my color combinations here, but if you, for instance, are not a big fan of yellow daylilies, right? You can really put any color daylily that you like with these plants and still have the same kind of effect. So I don't want you to feel that you have to choose the exact plants that I'm listing on my board. And in some instances, I didn't list specific varieties so that you kind of have that flexibility, right? And then staying kind of with the part shade theme here, another really versatile shrub is called Deer Villa, right? There's a couple of different cultivars out there now: Kodiak Fresh, Kodiak Orange, Kodiak Black, that are really going to offer you long-lasting color from the spring through the fall. The Deer Villa is a summer blooming shrub, and it gets these beautiful yellow flowers on its foliage. And it works really well in this combo with some other, like a black-leafed heuchera I've chosen to put this with. Again, featuring the sedge. This one is called Evergold. It's a very bright green, almost kind of dainty-looking plant, but it's not dainty. And with some Lenten rose, right, for early spring, and a ghost fern. So this combination here is just going to give you a variety of texture and colors that's really going to go well in part to mostly shade with some well-drained soil. And if you notice in this combo, right, there's not a lot of flower color. The combination alone of this like black-leafed heuchera with the bright chartreuse sedge is gonna give you so much color even without a bloom, right? Without a flower on there, although you do get flowers on the heuchera. This is mostly a texture, right? And color in the foliage. There are some shrubs that really do well in mostly shade. And the Deer Villa is one of them. If you find yourself in a situation where you want more choices for part shade, Deer Villa is a really good choice for that. But in this combo, we're looking at mixing Little Henry Itea with a hosta, with an astilbe, an autumn fern, and as you can see, this is its fall color here, so it turns this beautiful orange, yellowy fall color, extending your interest. Maybe a super early blooming plant like a bleeding heart, and then again, the Carex or the sedge, ice dance, another super versatile grass for you to use. And this works because the Little Henry is a super versatile native shrub. It requires very little pruning or maintenance. The early summer blooms are fragrant, so they're going to also attract pollinators to your garden. And then the foliage, again, changes to brilliant colors of orange and red in the fall. So once again, that's a shrub where you're going to have interest from early spring all the way to fall, which is awesome. And then the mix of hosta, astilbe, and ferns is going to provide you with a mix of texture, color, and bloom time that's really good in the shade. And then, of course, your Carex here kind of gives a spiky texture that complements like the larger hosta leaves and the astilbe and ferns very nicely. And then you can add even more color here by putting in some other spring blooming things like pulmonaria, your lungwort, or even like ground covers that like shade. Oh, one of my favorites is Canadian ginger. It's just a very low growing ground cover that loves to be in shade. All of these combinations offer bloom times that are a little staggered and or the foliage color of the shrubs. There's so many shrubs out there today that, and I'm talking about deciduous shrubs, that have colored leaves that are so easy to incorporate into your garden beds and that are going to give you that color from early spring all the way to frost. The Deer Villa being one of them. There's a couple of Weigelias that have variegated foliage that's going to work really nice. The ninebark, as I mentioned earlier, the ninebark is Physocarpus. A lot of purple leaf varieties. There are varieties that have brighter kind of orangey foliage. Another one that's super versatile with your foliage color is the barberries. The one I have featured here in the full sun, that one's orange pillar. They have a few other varieties that offer super colorful foliage that's really going to keep your interest all season long. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some questions. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, the question was, do you cut down your hydrangea? It all depends on what kind of hydrangea that you're growing, right? It's going to depend on when and how you're going to cut it down. For the most part, your summer blooming hydrangeas, you want to bloom, or if you want to keep the size, you generally want to prune them about third way down after it's done blooming. So really mid to late fall, okay? Most of the hydrangeas out there bloom on new wood, which means that they're gonna bloom on current season's growth rather than last season's growth. And so that's when you want to prune them. In fact, that's a good general rule to follow with all of your flowering shrubs. If you do want to prune them, they generally respond best to pruning after they're done flowering. Some people, okay, prefer to leave the hydrangea blooms on there because as they age, they kind of mature and turn, to either a wheat color or a dusty pink or whatever. A lot of people like to leave those on through the early spring to have additional added interest in the garden, and that's perfectly fine too. She wants some suggestions for a climbing rosebush in full sun. I've seen a couple of really neat combinations with climbing rose bushes. Lavender and roses work beautifully. So the lavender is gonna kind of cover the base of that rose, right, before it starts growing up, and it's really gonna hide some of that, as it comes out of the ground, it's maybe a little more brown, right, where the more of the color show is more up at top. So something like lavender is going to work really well for you. I don't know if you're familiar with Amsonia, the common name is eluding me right now. I can look that up for you. But there are a couple of different kinds of Amsonias. One of them is called Blue Star Amsonia. It's a spring lower blooming or lower growing plant that again is going to kind of fill that area at the base of your climbing rose. And then you can also do like lower growing perennials in there, like aster. That would be a good choice for really some fall color. You could also do things like coreopsis. Coreopsis is super long blooming in general and likes the same kind of conditions that a climbing rose does. So there's a couple of suggestions for you. Someone asked here, the question is if I can talk a little bit more about Mahonia, Oregon grape holly. You can put it in a container and it would probably stunt its growth a little bit. And speaking of containers, and I'll come back to your question in a second, you can pretty much put almost anything you want in a container. From small trees, I've seen small spruce and arborvitaes and even like the Chamaecyparis and boxwoods growing just fine in containers. Everything from annuals to, like I said, evergreen shrubs. Anything that can be planted in the ground can pretty much be planted in a container. You just have to make sure that your container size is going to be compatible with the plant size, but it will also kind of contain it in a lot of instances and keep it smaller, right? So if you don't have a lot of space, that's always an option. But back to the Mahonia, if I'm not mistaken, do you have that in a full sun?
I don't have it yet. I'm considering.
You're considering it. I don't have a lot of experience growing that myself, right? But it is a very texturized, kind of large plant, right? That kind of comes into its own kind of later in the spring, right? So I would choose to do like a lilac with that, maybe a other early blooming shrub, like maybe a deutzia, again, a viburnum, right? Some of the fragrant viburnums are gonna backset that really nice. And you can never go wrong with a daylily. They're almost indestructible, right? And they come in so many colors, in blooms, that you almost can't go wrong with that if you're ever kind of stuck, right? Another really versatile plant, which doesn't bloom very long, but they're nice to sprinkle in the garden, is your oriental kind of lilies. And also allium, right? If you're not familiar with onion, there's a lot of different varieties there. Some of them are perennials where you're going to have your foliage all year round. That's going to be almost grassy, maybe a little bit between a grass and an iris. Summer Beauty is a very popular one. I think there's one out there called Millennium, right? But that's a really good plant to incorporate for full sun where you want a little bit of texture and interest in with some of your other perennials. And I mentioned the liliums, right? So that's about all I can say about the Mahonia. I haven't grown that myself, so. How to stagger your plants. I'm a person that if you have a line against a garage, right, which many of us do, or a foundation planting that's maybe just kind of a straight garden bed, I do like to group my shrubs, maybe stagger them a little bit so that you have one a little forward, one a little back, one a little forward. So let's say you have a grouping of 3 there, right? You want to maybe make a little triangle with those and then use a companion plant that's going to fill the middle of that triangle. And then you can repeat that companion plant, right? Maybe in the next little area, plant maybe 3 of the companion plant, 1 of the shrubs. And so again, planting in multiples, planting in groups of 3s, and kind of repeating that throughout your bed. That's going to give you the visual interest and continuity that is very appealing to the eye. She's asking if you want to put the brighter colors in the front or in the back. And that really is a personal choice on how you want your colors to look, right? What you have to pay, I think, closer attention to is what the ultimate size is going to be. Because if you choose to put a brighter color in the back, but yet that shrub is going to cover it up, then you won't be happy because you'll never see your bright colored perennial, whatever that may be, right? So that's why you always have to kind of take into consideration what the full size of a plant is going to be. And then as far as spacing them, right, let's say that you chose, let's take for instance like this little clethra here, which I believe grows maybe 3 to 5 feet wide, right? And so when you're planting that, and the same with the roses too, when they tell you to plant it, you generally want to plant it from the center of that plant. If that's going to grow, let's say your clethra grows 4 feet, right? 4 feet wide. You're definitely going to want to plant those at least 4 feet apart so that when they are full grown, they won't kind of grow into each other, but yet each plant will have its own definition. And then another trick too, while you're waiting for your shrubs to mature, a lot of times people forget, like we see this cute little shrub in a container and you think it's gonna fit really well, and you forget that that shrub is gonna balloon in 3 to 5 years and grow a lot bigger than you originally thought it was gonna grow. One thing that I love to do while I'm waiting for my shrubs to go is simply fill it in with annuals. I mean, we didn't even talk about annuals here, but I find them super useful to fill in the garden while I'm waiting for my shrubs to mature, to kind of fill that blank spot where the shrub is eventually going to grow into that spot, and but yet you want immediate color. So the question is, planting more of a natural garden, a wildflower garden that gets mostly full sun with some spring and or fall blooming plants, right? One of my personal favorites for a wildflower garden is Aster divaricatus. It is a native fall blooming aster. It will naturalize a little bit. Anytime you're dealing with wildflowers or native plants, they are going to spread a little bit because that's what they're designed to do. But the Aster divaricatus is going to stay, it's not going to overtake your whole garden, but yet it's going to give you some beautiful fall bloom there. And then in the spring, early spring, you can always go with like a wild geranium, which is Geranium maculatum. That's going to do really well for the early spring. And, there's a lot of native coreopsis that are going to hold their color through the fall. The question is ground covers for an area that gets a lot of morning sun. And morning sun is not, as you probably know, is not as intense as your afternoon sun. So when you're thinking about planting a garden and you have a part sun situation, if you're dealing more with the morning sun, it's going to be a little more forgiving than that hot afternoon sun. So for a good ground cover for morning sun, one of my personal favorites is the Canadian ginger. It has just a very obviously low growing because it's a ground cover with like almost a heart-shaped leaf. It's rather slow growing, so it's not going to take over a whole area, and it won't go into areas where there's too much sun. So that's a really good option. And then ground covers for, well, of course, you've got your vinca, right? Your periwinkle, your pachysandra, things like that. Really enjoy those kind of situations. Did I inspire anybody? Yes. Okay, good. And again, don't be afraid to use your imagination. Pick plants and colors that you love, and always do your homework for those cultural requirements, and you will do just fine. Thank you all for coming today.